mentioned, and everyone has questions.
Oh, great. Awesome.
So this class ends at 1:50. I usually aim to end by 1:40. I usually get there later than that. Just to talk about what's coming up in the week ahead and the weeks ahead. So hi, welcome. There's some seats in the back. There's some right up here.
Just give me up.
Yeah, so how much time would you like for questions?
I'm happy to really let this be a conversation where I can show some stuff, and if we talk about, the first thing for a full hour, that's fine, and, if we kind of trust that, I can show other stuff.
So folks should feel free to pop in and answer questions.
And I'll try to prompt to open up, because I know it can be awkward to interrupt.
Well, without further ado, welcome, Jason.
Thank you.
We're so happy to have you here.
Thank you. My name is Jason Snell. Like Ellen mentioned, I'm in the low-res program, which is similar to ITP, but instead of 2 years, it's 1 year with no breaks, and it's in here. Then we'll go to Berlin in the winter, and then Shanghai for our thesis next summer. So that was part of what interested me, is the travel of that program. And a lot of people are a little bit further in their careers and can't take a full 2 years off. So a lot of people in the low-res program can do 1 year and come navigate, some of the classwork. For myself, I love being on the floor, so low res is really flexible, where you can be here as much as you want if you're in New York. And some of the students are in California and Shanghai, so they do their work remotely. One of the things I created this summer, which I think attracted a lot of attention, and I think Ellen saw this and was like, hey, can you show this? Is this thing I made, and it's both using, from my understanding, you're doing both pComp and P5, is that right? So the Arduino boards are using the Nano. So that's what I've got on this breakout board, is a Nano. And what this is made with, this is a subwoofer that you'd have in a car or home stereo, and wasn't too much, it was like 25 bucks. There's a Petri dish. This is a little amplifier. This is maybe 25 bucks. That just amplifies the sound, and the tone is coming off the Nano. So the Nano can produce tones. They're not super clear, they're pretty noisy, but for what we're doing, I'll show you here. Did you all see the video of this, of the water moving, the brain control?
No, that's
awesome. So this is great. Does anyone have a particularly quiet brain? Is anyone really zen and can quiet their brain? I take that as a no. Does anyone have do you want to try it?
Sure.
All right. So what we have is this, and you can see it up here as well. All right, what this is, have you ever used one of these? It's an EEG. They're pretty easy to put on, so they're retractable, and they're almost like headphones, but you put them on so it goes across your forehead, and then you tighten it like headphones. And so it's snug behind my ears and then snug on my forehead. And what it's doing is it's gonna read the electricity of my brain and then break those frequencies into different spectrums. And some of those neuroscientists have assigned those different frequencies to, they've just named those waves. There's delta waves, which are the lowest ones. They're usually, when you're unconscious, they're the most active. It's when your brain is kind of recharging and repairing itself. And then you've got, next up is theta waves, which is a very dreamy state, dreamy waves. Then you have alpha, which is a little more awake, that's meditative. And then beta, which I'm primarily in right now because I'm talking to you all, and if your eyes are open, you're up and about, you're mostly in beta. And then gamma, which is, can be moments of joy or insight. It's more externally focused. And one way to think about the waves is they go from low frequency to high frequency, but they also go from internal focus to external focus. So if you're completely unconscious, you're completely internally focused, and then you're asleep. And then when you're meditating, you can hear and your eyes are closed, but you have a little more outside focus. And then beta, you can kind of see what's going on in the world. And then gamma is interesting with the external focus. That's where you have the most external focus. And gamma, part of it can lead to, you kind of see your whole life and have these moments of insight, and you're like, oh, I kind of see what's going on in my life, and feel good about it. But gamma is also really high in people with schizophrenia. And they have a very external focus in terms of reading a lot of meaning into random things and thinking there's intentionality there. So that's something I've learned just in my conversations with neuroscientists. So I started with making projects with EEGs, mostly making music with the brain. And through making that art, talking to neuroscientists, they're like, what are you doing? Like, tell us about what you're doing. And so I've been able to learn from neuroscientists through this type of cross-disciplinary work that we're all doing. All right, let's get this on. What's your name?
Andy.
Andy? All right, let's get this on you. And then if you want to come over here so you can see this dish of water. And then we'll be able to get a readout of your brain here. So I'm gonna pair the device. And so the device is Bluetooth and it's gonna talk to the computer, which then sends commands to the Arduino board, which controls the dish. Can you see this here? Yeah. So this app here was made, the visuals are with P5. I'm using a JavaScript library called Muse.js, which helps connect with these headsets. And it's looking in the local, it's scanning local Bluetooth to pair with it. Can I see the headset for a second?
Yeah.
Restart.
How much do they cost?
You can get them used. Actually, just found a bunch of them for like 100 and asked Marlin to buy some. We'll see if he does or not. Because it would be cool to be able to have more students work with these. There we go. So I can put that on and tighten it. Once it pairs, it takes a few seconds and then we'll start to see a readout. Usually it's mostly, so what's interesting about the EEG is when you don't have it on, it's noisy, or if it's just picking up the electricity in the air, it's a really noisy signal. So it's about finding the signal in the noise. So the level that you see on the screen will get, once you've got a good connection, it'll get more nuanced and you'll start to see some signal inside of, all the spikes. See if you can tighten it a little bit and get it further behind your ears like glasses.
So is that my brain? Like this,
Yeah.
thing?
There we go, that's a good signal. And so when he laughs and moves, we see some spikes on the left side. That's a mirror, right? Yeah, on the left side. And that's muscle tension. So the sensors will also pick up on, you've got a really quiet brain. And then these spikes down here are from around here. So down here is delta, it's the low frequency. With this particular headset, delta isn't meaning he's asleep, it means that there's muscle tension. And that's just that's part of the noise that can come up with the EEGs, is they can pick up on muscle tension and stuff, what's going on in the brain. And then as we go up this spectrum, I've got the frequencies here. Theta, the dream state, is in here. Alpha is around here. This whole range is beta. And then as you get up in here, it's gamma. And so these are the values. So yeah, you're actually super chill. Other people put this on and it's like up here. All right, so his brain information is coming through here, coming into the amplifier and coming into this dish. Let's have a view here. Go ahead and come over, and what you'll see is the dish is going to be vibrating from this subwoofer. I'm pumping low frequencies into the dish. I'm just going to pour water in it. It's weird to pour water on electronic, but it's a Petri dish. It fits well. It's always funny after I do demos, I'll go to the kitchen sink and I dump the water with the speaker. It always feels weird dumping water out of the electronic. All right, increase the volume. The frequencies I'm using, something I studied as I was building this is something called cymatics. And with cymatics, it's about, when his brain is busy, the wires can move more. And then when his brain is calm, it's gonna go still. So it's just up to you. It becomes a mirror for your brain. And it can be hard, standing in front of a class, to get your brain to be quiet. But you start to see fluctuations in the water, its movement, its intensity based on what's happening in his brain. So it's a physical representation of his brain in matter. The patterns that you see, so I mentioned cymatics. Cymatics is when you use very specific frequencies and put them into matter, whether it's powder. So some people do them with metal plates. They dump powder on it, and then they create these really beautiful patterns when you put certain sound waves into them. And you can also do the same thing with water. So it's not that any frequency would create the patterns that you see in this dish. It's very specific patterns. So what we're working with here is like 47 to 57 hertz. And in that range creates, can you blink? There we go. Creates these types of ripples. And then if I had set it up to like 60 hertz instead of like 58, there'd be no effect on the water. So it's this really unique phenomenon in physics where just these certain frequencies, like this will create patterns and that's nothing. And then this will create patterns and that's nothing. So I came across that. I explored using powder a bit. It's a bit of a drag because you have to keep dumping powder on and then you have to clean up all this powder off this, Weber surface you're on. And I like water because for me, thought and water, we're mostly water, and in our bodies, the electrical signals are moving through the medium of water. So it felt like this was a better representation. Any questions about what's happening here, either with the EEG? Do you have any questions about your brain being rendered in water?
Does it respond to like physical movement as well?
Yep, you'll get spikes down here from physical movement. So even when you turned, it's spiked here. And it picks up on micro movement in the forehead because the sensor's here and behind the ears. So facial expression or talking will create spikes on the low end, but not the high end. Yeah.
In terms of technicality, how did you map his brain frequencies to be connected to that device? I don't know how to call it.
This thing, yeah.
Yeah.
Speaker.
What's exactly linked?
The mapping.
Yeah.
So what I'm doing is I'm taking most of the frequencies are stimulation frequencies. So when there's a type of stimulus, it'll go up. So like gamma, beta, muscle tension. And I'm reading when those go up, that's one level. And then if you were to close your eyes and go into a meditative state, that's alpha. And alpha is a very special frequency in the spectrum. So most of them are about stimulation and alpha is about suppression. Alpha allows us to focus inward. And when we get quiet with ourselves, our alpha goes up and the rest of them go down. So there's this inverse relationship where if I'm going inward, most of my values go down and my alpha goes up. And then if I'm busy or stressed out, the rest of them go up and my alpha goes down. So what I'm doing is I'm taking alpha and subtracting it from the sum of the rest of them. And that gives me this idea of like overall stimulation.
Okay.
So if I did it with all of them, included alpha, it'd become a mixed signal. And so I'm subtracting the alpha from the rest of them. And then sending that, I believe in the code. Are you guys using the P5 editor or have you gotten to VS Code?
Yeah.
We're using
P500.
the editor, although I'm going to show them VS Code in the next 2 weeks.
I'll show you VS Code. Let's see, sketch or EEG. I'll give you a share if you want to sit down and like meditate or go ahead and like look at the dish and see what
I'm
happens.
trying to make it like still.
Totally, yeah, sit, and what I tend to do is look at the water and see if we can create a biofeedback loop and get it to become stiller. All right, this is using that P5 library. So I'm grabbing data from the different sensors. So I've got the right ear, the forehead, right forehead, left ear. And I'm blanking up, I'm initializing the variables and then setting them with the current, it reads, I think like 30 times a second. So it's a really fast refresh rate. and then creating averages per sensor. So since there's 4 sensors, I take the average of all of them. So if I get a delta reading from all 4, I add them all together and divide by 4 to get an average of what that delta is. Index, we've got sensor. And so the question is find the process value. Position for frequency, so I am doing this. One of the things you can do as you have this, let's take a look at brain again. Hope this isn't too intrusive. Super gel. So when you, these chairs, when you have these different spikes going across, you can calculate which one's the highest at a given moment. So, this one's highest, now that one, particularly if you're ignoring the noise from the muscular tension. With a busier brain, you will see higher spikes, and we can try on someone else as well. And what I'm doing is looking at where is the highest peak, and then turning the frequency of the water, ranging it based on that peak. So if the peak is low, I'm at the lower end of a sound frequency. I'm closer to that. It was a 47 to 57 range. And so as the brain's peak activity moves up and down this range, the frequency of the tone going into that is moving up and down in the same way. So there's a correlation between a higher frequency peak, if you're moving up towards gamma, is going to be the highest frequency coming into that, which creates a different pattern than at the lowest frequency. The higher the frequency is in the water, the smaller the patterns are, and the lower frequencies create bigger, kind of swimming, larger patterns. Did that answer the question?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Any other questions about what you're seeing? Anyone with a busy brain want to try this?
Figure it out.
Well, okay, come on up. Thank you.
That's weird. It's like a visual representation of like what I'm thinking of.
Totally.
It's kind of cool.
So you'll have to take off your glasses in order to get a good reading.
Yeah.
And then when you put it on, this is how it tightens.
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead and sit down if you want. And move it down a little bit so it's more in the middle of your forehead. Perfect.
Yeah.
And then tighten it.
I actually can't see anymore.
I'm reconnecting to the headset.
Yeah. I think it's too tight.
What if it got turned off? Can you take it off for a second and then just put it on? There we go. Thank you. Typical of ITP projects is you get 5 different systems to talk to each other. So we've got the headset, we've got the computer, we've got the Arduino board, and when you see all of them together, it's like, how would I build that? Like, how would I get to the point? And each one of these just started with one step. So the first step was, how do I get the headset to talk to the computer, and then build from there. So particularly if you look at the code and you're like, that's a ton of code, how would I ever do that? All these complex systems start with a bunch of simple small components. And if the small components are built in a way that is like clean or simple or understandable, then when you make something larger, it's easier to debug that and figure out, oh, I want it to do this, or oh, I can take this code from this other project and drag it into this new one. That's a pretty chill braid too, but you can see some different spikes here. And so there's this gamma spike up here that's going to change.
I'm trying to make it busy right now.
There you go.
Can you explain what the gamma spike means?
With this particular sensor, it usually shows there's just overall more going on in your brain, you know, just in terms of, I want to presume, you know, what you're thinking or your stress level, but usually when those levels are higher, someone just has more in their mind, literally, just, you know, more is just going on, whether it's like being stressed about something or preoccupied, or I don't know, how are you feeling?
I love how I'm controlling.
No.
Like, I'm just thinking about stressful things. And yeah, and it's changing. I like that.
That's great.
Yeah.
Can you stop thinking about stressful things and see if it gets more chill? Wow. Oh, we're not seeing it. There we go.
It can get really high, really fast.
Totally.
Yeah.
And so you get a sense of like this thing that's normally invisible, which is, what is my brain doing? What am I thinking? What is consciousness? What's my mind? Through these types of sensors and being able to render it as a visual or a sound, which I'll show some of that work, or something physical that's moving, you get a sense of how fast does the mind change? You know, how fast does it get active, or how fast or how long does it take to like get it to be still? Those types of things are just guesses, because my only way of having a sense of what my mind is doing is my mind. You know, there's no mirror. I'm just like, well, I think I'm calm, but how do I really know if I'm used to like being stressed out all the time? And then when I have this mirror, it's kind of like, how do I know what my face looks like without a mirror? You know, I can kind of guess and like, oh, okay, it's the shape or whatever and the size. But once I see the mirror, I'm like, oh, okay, this is what's happening. You know, I'm seeing what's happening in real time. And this has allowed me to have just a tremendous amount of learning about what my brain does, and even interesting things with consciousness. Next, I'll show you some music with an EEG. Some of the experiences I've had with hearing my thoughts, so my thoughts, instead of these spikes being converted into patterns in the water, being converted into musical notes. And there's been times during performances where I got into such a deep meditation that I just heard these like long kind of alpha bass sounds, and that's what I programmed it to do when my alpha went up, meaning when I got into a relaxed meditative state. I wouldn't hear a bunch of notes, I would just kind of hear this idling of this like bassy, soothing sound. So I got down to that state, and as soon as my brain would start revving up with thought or worry, or, you know, is this working, or who's at the show, or whatever happens at a performance, I would start hearing notes again, you know, higher notes of a different synthesizer. And there's a couple times where I experienced, turn it down a little bit. There's a couple times where I had gotten down to that place where I really cleared my mind. I'm like, okay, I'm in this space, my mind is clear. It's weird to watch your brain when it's not active, because it's like, who's watching? You know, like, what is this part of my consciousness or my brain that is aware that my brain is still? So that was the first part of like, okay, is there a watcher of the brain? And then the thing that really kind of rattled my sense of what life is a number of times I would hear a note, meaning my brain was revving up again into active thought, and then I had the thought. Even with this delay, I was like, wait, why did I hear the thought before I experienced the thought? And a few months later, I'd read this book called Conscious. It's by Annika Harris. And she talked about these different studies where the voice in my head thinks it's making the decisions and in control of my life, but it could be it's more an observation place, and it's not the actual decision maker. And then it's like, well, who's making the decisions then? Like, you know, if my life is like some sort of ship, and I think I'm the captain, but I'm actually on the observation deck, like, who's the captain? Like, who's making these? So I would have never experienced that, because I've meditated for many years, you know, before doing this work. I never had that insight because I never had that mirror up to my brain. You know, I didn't hear when a thought happened. I would just be like, oh, I'm meditating, now I have a thought. Oh, I'm meditating again, now I have a thought. There was no feedback to show me that the thought happened before I was aware of the thought. So those are the types of things I've learned by being able to use technology that we learn at school. Yeah.
When you convert like the readings into music,
Mm-hmm.
would the music not act as like a stimulus that would affect the further readings?
It does.
So is the music that you're producing from your brain, like, is that like, are you trying to get it like as an accurate representation of what you're thinking, or is it just like, I'm not sure, like,
It's good. I know what
I
you're
feel like
saying.
it would be like a loop.
Yeah.
Like you would react to the sound that you're hearing, but it's coming from your brain.
Exactly.
I don't know how to say it.
So what that is a biofeedback loop.
Yeah.
And what I try to do when I'm choosing the sounds, and this is where I make decisions based on creativity, like what's something that's interesting and beautiful, and and based on science, what's something that represents, the mental state that I'm experiencing. So if I choose sounds, if I close my eyes and meditate, and the audio feedback I get is like loud or abrasive, it's gonna take me right out of that state. But if I choose sounds that are soothing or calming, all of a sudden it creates this biofeedback loop that starts to increase my relaxed state, which then increases the sound, which then increases my relaxed state. And because of that, I've been able to, through meditation, I've been able to go a little bit down and a little bit up, into like a exciting or exhilarating type of state of mind, or down into relaxed state of mind, just on my own accord. But what happens with the system is when I meditate and then the music meets me, then I can go deeper. And then the music meets me and I can go deeper. So something I had never experienced until doing this type of work was, I think it was the second time I was performing a show with this type of system. And I'd gotten into such a meditative state, I forgot I was at a show. Like I was on stage and started to move into a dream state. I was sitting, I was listening to the music, and the music got bassier and dreamier, and I went deeper and deeper inside of me. And then I opened my eyes, I was like, oh, I'm at a show. And I'd never gotten that deeply relaxed at a show before. I mean, it's ridiculous. I mean, I have to make sure everything's working and people are there and they're looking at me and I'm on the stage. Like, to get that relaxed is something I've never been able to do before. So that's one of the things I'm really curious about with this type of work, is that biofeedback type of phenomenon. Whereas other people, a lot of people have asked me, well, what happens if you don't hear the music and just hear, or don't hear anything, you just put it on and have it make music? That's a different exploration, which is totally valid. That's a great question. Yeah.
I have a question regarding everyone's response to different kind of music.
Yeah.
So, in the general, like in real life, people say, "Oh, this kind of music calms me down," and it can be different from person to person.
Yeah.
But in the general sense, we know that classical music, even like the impact on rats, there's experiences that show that it calms the like brains down.
Mm-hmm.
But have you done any experience that shows that different kind of music have different impact on people's brains, or is it more like a general BPM, like this kind of BPM affects in this way and this kind of BPM affects in this way more generally?
That's
Does that
great.
make sense?
Yeah, it does. I have done some research looking at is there any sort of standard of this type of music is going to impact a person in a certain way. There is a difficulty because music is really subjective. So you could have something like classical where you're like, oh, that's going to relax everyone. But if someone has an emotional association, let's say they had, a grandparent that loved classical, but like was really abusive to them. And so they hate classical and they hear it and they get really stressed out. Like that's a legitimate response to that music, because music is tied so much with emotion, which then gets tied to, burned into the brain in a really deep way. I think that's one of the appeals of this, is that it's just water moving or water not moving. You don't have these like this baggage or these pre-associated ideas of like, oh, I hate when water moves, or I hate when water is still, and having a reaction that messes with the signal. But that's also the power of music too, is that it can be an amplifier, because if you're hearing something that is beautiful for you, that makes your brain state amplify, and then you have a more powerful experience.
Mm-hmm.
I did some, it would be useful to show some of them, but some studies I did just with like my brother and my mom, I played them different songs based on, so I played them, I think like a Beatles song that I knew both of them would know, and then I played them like an obscure electronic music song I knew both of them wouldn't know, and saw how did their brains react. And a big part of the brain and music is prediction functionality. So if we're listening to a song we know what's coming next. Or if we hear a song that maybe we've never heard before, but it's in a pop format, we have a sense of when the chorus or the drop or something is coming up. So there's this really strong predictive functioning with music. If we're listening to something that's really experimental and we have no idea what's coming up, our brains can act quite differently. Even if we like the sounds, but we're just like, I don't know where this is going. This is like weird music. And so what was interesting with some of the thing with the Beatles was this, I started to see, particularly my mom, because she had heard the Beatles for decades, when the chorus of this song was coming up, her brain would follow so it started to look like sheet music, so it was like, as the swell of, I think I was playing for her Eleanor Rigby, and so when the swell of that chorus came up, her brain just went, all the lonely people. I'm not a singer, but you could start to see the overall stimulation of her brain match the energy level in the song.
Wow.
Yeah, it was fascinating. And then another thing I did last summer was I'm working with an opera singer who wants to create a type of biometric biosensor opera, to have some sort of the content or the lights or something to be manipulated with biosensors. And at first we tried putting the EEGs on the opera singers, but when they're singing, there's too much noise. They're moving their face so much. And so you can't get a clean EEG signal. And so our next test was, well, what if we put the EEGs on the audience members? And the reaction of the audience and what they're feeling in course of watching the music changes maybe the score or the lighting or something on stage where, performers always have a sense of like, how's the audience feeling right now? But if they actually had biometrics from the audience and that somehow changes the environment that they're performing in. So we did these, or if I can find this.
Should I take this?
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm
Yeah.
sorry. Forgot to.
Thank you.
Thank you. Let's round of applause for the brains that were able to see. Thank you. They did it. That would be in. So to talk a little bit about documentation. So these are all videos I've done of EEG performances, EEG research, heart research, anything with biosensors. When I come up with something, I usually video it. And so this goes back, I transferred everything to NYU. One of the perks of being at NYU is you get a huge Google Drive. But it goes back to 2018, where I first started doing this experimentation. And by documenting it, if I forget how to do something or I want to, go back and show an experiment, I can tell you about it or I can actually, show it to you. And then another thing that's been really important for me with documentation as I've created these types of things and then worked with private companies like startups who are interested in biosensors or having some sort of biofeedback loop, just the nature of corporations and companies is as they grow, they want to absorb their consultants, they want to absorb their employees. If their employee has a good idea, they want to own that idea. Even if there's no malice in it, like that's just the nature of corporations. They want to own the things so when they, if the company sells at a later date, they want to have clear ownership of the things. So if I'm doing consulting with a company and we have some good ideas and we have these conversations of like, oh, we could build this thing, blah, 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 blah. And then later they're like, oh, you came up with that idea with us, we own that idea. I can go back and be like, oh no, I've got all this footage, particularly on YouTube, because there's gonna be a timestamp. I've got all this footage of this research I did 5 years before I met you. So, I clearly have been doing this type of work before. So that's just something from a commercial business standpoint of like the power of documentation. I think it's this bio-opera test. Would be a good one to show. I think Christina. So we're doing a show tune, and it was just something simple that everyone would recognize, and there's 3 screens, so you can see us. Over here's a singer. She's just singing, I think It Had to Be You. So we've got what the person is seeing. We've got what their brain is doing. It's using the same headset with an app called Mind Monitor, and it's just an easy printout of the different waves. And then we have a camera on the person. Do you see that delta go up? Delta is the red line. So one of the things that we started to look at, if we just had this middle frame with no sound and no video, we'd be like, oh, I'm just seeing lines go up and down. What's that mean? It's like, whatever, it's just these lines. You add the music and you're like, oh, maybe there's a correlation between what the person is hearing and what their brain is doing. And then we start to have these experiences where by seeing the person's face, seeing their brain waves, and seeing what they're seeing and hearing what they're hearing, it's almost like metadata. So for example, like with metadata on my phone. So if I'm at the bank and my phone knows I'm at the bank, okay, that's a data point. So Jason went to the bank, so what? But what if I put a timestamp on it? Okay, I'm at the bank at 10 a.m. Okay, that's normal. But what if I'm at the bank at 3 a.m.? All of a sudden, that's a different narrative. It's like, am I robbing a place? Like, do I have a friend there and they let me in? Like, why am I at the bank at 3 a.m.? And all of a sudden you get all this more information just by having 2 data points. And so that's the power of like Facebook and these different social medias. They have all these different data points on our behavior. And as individual data points, they're not that impactful. But then you start to create this narrative of what the person is doing when you get a bunch of data points. And that's what this experiment, it got a little creepy because I won't show you, but so the opera singer, her dad was there. You know, we just grabbed whoever volunteers we could. And we could tell he just didn't want to be there. His brain waves were like, maybe I'll show you a little bit. So they sing the song twice, and I'll just jump ahead. And he wants to be there, but he doesn't, you know, it's like he's there for his daughter. You know, his wife was there too, and he's like, all right, I'll go. But as soon as the song starts to end, the first time, which will be in the middle, I'll show you in a second, all his brain waves go up. He's like, all right, we're done, I'm out of here. You can see him get excited. And then when she starts to sing the song again, she starts it over, you see his brain waves just drop. He's like, oh no, how many times is he gonna repeat? Like, am I stuck here? Is this gonna be 15 times? Is it gonna be 2 times? And you see his face. So we're getting near the end. Alpha is music enjoyment, so that blue line. So it's end of the song. He's relieved, Alpha's going up. Oh no. And then they really start to dive. And then, this is a little awkward, but if you look at his eyes, so they're getting more compressed and they're getting lower. There's a certain moment, this is super awkward. You see the strain on his face. Boom, right there. Okay, so this was super awkward to go through. So you'll see the brainwaves start to go up, and he starts nodding his head. So what you did is you saw his eyes flick down. So he checked out the singer's body. So his brain was like, I don't want to be here, I'm super bored. And then he like looked at this attractive singer and he's like, all right, I'll make the best of this. And so he's like bopped along for the rest of it. That's really intimate knowledge, particularly if that's your dad. You know, like the singer is not the child. The person who was orchestrating all this was the daughter. So the singer is a friend. It's like way too much information about what's going on in someone's brain. You know, you get these different data points.
So actually, if the person knows that, she is wearing the headset, wouldn't that actually end up impacting the brain waves?
Sure.
Because like, that also comes with the anxiety of knowing that, okay, this is being tracked.
Yeah.
Right? So it's gonna impact it anyways.
Yeah.
So how does that work out?
It does add a layer of stress. You know, it's the observation effect.
Mm-hmm.
And anytime you do a study, you know, that's a thing. So that's why they do these blind tests. You know, if you're in the like psychology department, they're like, hey, let's do a study, and you know, you're gonna be doing this puzzle thing, but it's not about the puzzle, it's what you do when you walk out the door and like there's some random thing you think is random. So to create studies in a way that you're not aware of what's being studied. It's harder when you put on a headset because you're like, okay, I'm putting this thing on. And so that is something that can, I don't want to say corrupt the data, because people can get comfortable with it and you get some data in terms of, some it depends on like what the process is. Like these headsets are particularly easy to get on. You know, you just put it on and it starts ringing. Like some more advanced headsets take about 45 minutes to put on because you have to use this gel. It's like 128 sensors and it's a cap. So that whole process, you know, that is a challenge of like, how do you get realistic data? Or is there a way you can realize, okay, there's gonna be some noise here. So algorithmically, can I like turn it down or look for patterns in which you could do a thing. This is common with audio engineering, so part of my background is music as well. So if I'm doing an audio recording and then I bring it into a software later, if there's space where there's no music or no voice, and I sample just what the ambient room noise is, you know, it's just gonna be this like hiss or this hum or like an air conditioner or something, I can select that, I can sample it, and then the software I have will do this algorithmic thing where it then removes just that frequency from the rest of the signal. So it's pulling out the noise to try to get a stronger signal. And so I'm sure there's ways you could do that as well with EEG of like, what if we have someone just sitting there for a period of time, not doing anything before you introduce the stimulus, and then try to subtract that idling state from the stimulus and be like, okay, these are the real peaks, and that's the noise. But yeah, that is a concern.
Yeah.
Any other questions right now? I'll show you some music from the EEG. Again, so this is my YouTube channel, and what's great is all of these have a timestamp. So there's a personal history in terms of seeing my work as it's developed, and then also, you know, if I'm working with someone and there's a question about who came up with the idea first, you know, it's important to have this documentation. I'm gonna show this, this is a ridiculous little clip. I'm gonna show it, it's like 2 minutes. It was right before the pandemic. It was literally like March 12th. I think I had COVID and didn't know it, so it was a little awkward. So one of the things that can be difficult with any sort of performance or like making sure everything's plugged in and work, what helps is just practicing it. And so a lot of times I will practice doing setups at home. I'll break everything down and like plug it back in before going to the performance space. One story I'll share that has to do with that, a lesson I learned. I was doing a motion sensor, it's not EEG, but motion sensor work. It was, this is the short version. So I was working with a dancer that was wearing motion sensors on his wrist, and then he was composing a sound based on his motion. So this was a predecessor to the EEG work. And so I was using these Myo wristbands. They're very easy to wear. They're super durable. You can like throw them across the room and they're fine. And we're composing musical notes, and also he had taken different poems, and I'd slice them up, and the words of the poem would be triggered based on his movement as well. So he was like kind of recontextualizing, restructuring these poems with his dance. When I was setting up for the show, I document my work. So like right now I'm videoing, this work as well, just so I have a documentation of like, oh, I present at NYU, rather than just saying I present at NYU. I have this video that, I can have for myself. And I was setting up my videos for this performance that you just saw the footage of. Talk about algorithmic intimacy, like seeing someone's recommended YouTube list. Like, so, I watch Saturday Night Live and like, do yoga in the mornings. Like, it's this really like intimate snapshot of like, spending time with YouTube. Anyways, so when I was setting up for that motion sensor show, I had two cameras. I was using some old iPhones on tripods. So I had, one camera here and one camera here, and then I had the wristbands, the drum machine, it was triggering my computer. One of the wristbands, I just tested it at home. Everything was working. So I came to the performance space, set up the cameras, got everything ready, booted up my computer, and only one of the wristbands was syncing. I was like, oh, okay, what's going on with this other wristband? I rebooted my computer, didn't work. I rebooted the iPhone app that was connecting it, didn't work. And I had gone to the performance space like 2 hours early just to make sure. It was one of my first times using these wristbands. So I was like, I don't know, maybe something's gonna happen. And then thank God I had these 2 hours rather than 10 minutes. And I ended up like reinstalling the firmware on the sensors, didn't work. I was like, what is going on? And I knew my brain was getting too panicked and revved up. I was like, I need to go for a walk. Just a short walk, 10-minute walk, and I bet the answer will come to me as soon as I stand up and walk away and get out of here. And exactly when I started to stand up, I stopped looking at the computer and I looked over at the camera and I thought, wait a minute. And I went over to the camera. It was an old iPhone that I hadn't started up in, like 4 months or something. And what I found was an old version of my motion sensor app was active on that iPhone. And so the wristband that was trying to connect to my computer was pairing with my old iPhone. And I didn't know that at home because I didn't have the cameras on. And so I just had to go over, turn off the app on the phone. It freed up the pairing, because Bluetooth devices can only pair with one device at a time. And so just something like that, it's like, how would I, the weird stuff can happen. And so through practice and understanding how equipment can behave in different spaces, like I've run this, I've shown this in different environments, this, the water movement thing. How did I get on that? Oh, so what I'm gonna show you is this morning news thing. I had just finished a tour, so I was super used to like hooking up the EEG and having it run. And so this is, I was in Winnipeg for a tech conference, art and technology conference. And this is like live, it's like 6 a.m. I woke up at like 4:30 at the hotel and like come here. And I've got 4 minutes, or maybe 2 minutes. I've got 2 minutes, it's live. So if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. And it's getting, it's not like, like major news or whatever, but it would have been embarrassing to be on the like morning news in Winnipeg and this thing not work. But it did work because I practiced it enough.
Which then converts it into
Two-day event kicking off today in Winnipeg
So funny.
combines technology and the traditional arts. And we have Jason Snell, one of the presenters. And how do you describe to people what you do? Because it is incredibly interesting and very cool.
Well, I've hacked into this EEG headband, which will read the electrical activity of my brain, and it goes Bluetooth into an iPhone app I made, which then converts it into musical information, and then that will play a sound kit off the computer. So it's essentially brain waves to MIDI, which is electronic music language, into actual sound, and so I'm able to compose entirely with my brain.
On an app that you made yourself.
Right.
Oh my gosh, okay, we need to see this. Yeah, we need to see this in action, please.
So I have to turn this on, make sure it pairs, you know, because sometimes it takes like a minute, but I only have 2 minutes.
A little bit, and that's one of the purposes of doing this.
And she's asking me questions, so I'm like panicking. And I'm like, I hope this works, because if it doesn't, we only have like 30 more
If I'm
seconds.
nervous, if I'm relaxed, if I'm focused, if I'm unfocused, that comes out with the music, so.
Really focus.
There we go.
And it paired, thankfully. And then you start seeing the brainwaves over here. And it played music. It was like a super like doomy kit. I was like, should I have chosen such a like my background is like really experimental, like dark electronic music. And sometimes I forget other people aren't used to that. The dude's face. He's like, what I signed up for. Because he brought me, he was the coordinator of the conference.
We have to throw a commercial break, but before we do so,
And boom, that's it. Like, it was like, okay, this better work. You've got like 30 seconds to make this work. Usually it's not this like high pressure. People are more understanding of like, oh, if it, I'm having technical difficulties, whatever. But it is the value of practice, because I had done this like dozens of times on stages, and this was like a tour right before the pandemic. So it did work out. And if it didn't, so what?
How did you get the opportunity to like speak at the morning news?
It was a part of a conference that was happening that weekend. It got canceled halfway through because COVID cases started to pop up, and it was in Winnipeg. I was finishing a European tour, and they had contacted me. I think they had seen one of my performances. Someone in Winnipeg had sent them videos of my work. So that's another thing with documentation, is you can share it online and be like, this is what I'm working on. And they had seen me do the EEG sonification, and I think it was someone that I had done music shows with years before I did EEG work, and was just doing like techno or experimental shows. And he liked my work and continued to follow it over the years, and had dropped my name to this. It was called Merging Mindsets. Here's footage from the actual conference. I'll get to where you can hear some of the music. So the brain waves you see, it's mirroring out from the center like a Rorschach test. I like the visual of that rather than just going left to right. The blue wave that you see the highest means that I'm primarily in a meditative state, so I usually use blue for meditation. And then the ones below it are the other waves, like delta, theta, gamma. And so the sounds change and morph as my brainwave states go up in terms of triggering notes on different types of synthesizers. One of the things that can come up with artwork is I was always testing the system on myself. And so I had mapped the sound specifically to my brain. And when I was making this, I don't know, my gamma was never really high. And so sometimes I put the EEG on other people and they would have high gamma and no sounds would come out, because I built the system around me. So that's some of the powerful things about doing user testing, is trying your system on other people, is because brains are different, and making sure that the feedback you get from a sensor, whether it's a heart sensor, a brain sensor, a motion sensor, people move in different ways, is user tested with other people. Yeah.
So, after experimenting with what you built yourself, did you get control over your thoughts in a way that you could control the music as you wanted it to be, like being more in a meditative state or less in it as you wish? Like, could you have control over it to control the music?
It usually takes time. So at the beginning of the show, I don't. My brain's just firing off electricity, and just, I'm just busy and trying to, get everything set up. And then during the course of the show, I get more and more control as I start to calm down and focus and start to become aware of what's going on in my brain and less worried about is everything working.
But in the process of for example, trying to create one song,
Mm-hmm.
it will make some activities in your mind because creative ideas stimulate your brain.
Yeah.
So how do you internally what's your thought,
What's going on in my
what's
brain?
going on in your brain
Yeah.
for you to not let your ideas you know what I mean?
I think so. What's happening internally?
Yeah.
That's been something that's evolved quite a bit. So if I can get further into a performance, like if a performance is like 20 minutes, 25 minutes, I can get to a space where I feel like I've gotten to the canvas. So initially, it's just this busyness and I'm trying to make my way through the noise and trying to get clear in my brain. But over a period of time, I get down to alpha, which is kind of a foundation of calmness, and it's a musical. Alpha is really associated with music. And then what happens in my brain is once I get down to the canvas level, I can start doing visualizations, and then the sounds, like the peaks and the other parts, start to emulate what I'm visualizing. So sometimes it's been visualizations, sometimes it's been being in your brain and composing. It feels like steering a boat. So it's not as angular as like turning a car or just turning a direction while walking. Being in the medium of water, because it's electricity primarily in water in our brains, when I visualize something or try to turn something, it feels like I'm manipulating a physical object in a way. And when I turn it, it feels like the boat is turning, and then there's this wake that comes off of the boat, and that wake is the waves that you see on the screen, and that's what then triggers the sound. And then I turn the other way, and it creates a wake over here. So it takes a while to get down to that canvas level and being able to start to do these strokes on the canvas that are intentional and have the impact that I wanted to in the moment. But it takes a while to get down, kind of like through the layers of the noise, down to that creation space. And once you're down there, it feels like I've made it down to my subconscious, and I can start arranging things. And I think that's some of the power of what this could do for like neurotherapy. People getting down below the noise of their everyday and start arranging the pieces of how their brain, that consciousness or that mental state feels, or just what the room looks like. Did that answer it?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
That's a great question. Any other questions?
I have another question.
Sure.
So in terms of the visuals that you showed right there, so is that you created those visuals, or
I did.
okay?
Yeah.
So you linked that. How did the mapping go again?
Yeah,
Same question.
that one's more direct, and so of the different brain waves, break them into delta, theta, alpha, beta, gamma. I assigned each one their own color and averaged those bands, and so just as that number goes up and down, it draws on a chart. So you can do something very similar with P5. It's these numbers going up and down, and once you see it visualized, you can start understanding these relationships of, when I feel this certain thing, I see this wave go up. When I get calm, this other wave goes up and these other ones go down.
Mm-hmm.
And then making creative decisions of, what color does calm feel like? And so for me, it's like a blue. It's like that turquoise blue I use. What color does stress feel like? And so I often use red. And some other experiments, this one was recent. This is part of my low-res work. So I put on the EEG, and I was doing a test of kind of really intense biofeedback loops. I'm sitting, I've got the EEG, and when it picks up on muscular tension on my face, it triggers this like intense red flashing and this blast of noise. The speaker is like right in front of my face. And then if I can like work my way through that noise and get to a calm place, the sound gets more chill, and this blue light lights up behind me. And what I was exploring was the tension between external stimulus from the outside world, coming in on the brain, and then my brain's ability to create a mental map that can filter out and block that stimulus. And you see that line go back and forth as the sound changes, and then visually you'll see red light on the front is I'm stressed out, and then if I'm able to go inward, that goes down, and then the blue goes behind me, so you see that line move. This is just raw footage from some of those sessions. So the tenser I get, the more charged and intense the music gets in terms of like the electric static and the pulses. And the light, it's like a theater light. It's like right in my face. I was really trying to create a strong biofeedback loop. And then if you jump ahead, I was able to get more into myself, kind of putting my head down so the lights weren't hitting me as strong. And so you start to see more blue in the back, and that's showing that my alpha is going up and I'm able to focus, ignore the noise and focus inward. So those are the types of experiments, particularly being here and having, this started with research. And so in one of our classes, it's called critical experience. It's making art based on research rather than being, typically I make art, I'm like, oh, I found this cool thing, like what can I do with it? Like this is an interesting new technology. And one of the things with grad school is learning, or with school in general is learning, and you're doing some research in this class, is that right, Ellen? Or at least some early kind of idea of, well, you can always do research.
Yeah.
But this idea of, what if I dive deep into some sort of subject and then the art comes out of my fascination with that subject? And so what I was studying with this was the pressure of two systems pressing against each other. And what I was looking at was microbiology of like a cell. Like a cell, inside the cell, there's pressure inside of it, which helps keep its form. So the pressure is pushing out towards the cell membrane. And then the water that's in is pressing in. And those two have to have a pretty much similar pressure, because if the pressure on the outside is too much, the cell gets crushed. And if the pressure on the inside is too much, the cell expands and explodes. And so I took that model of pressure between two systems and applied it to consciousness. The pressure from the outside world, of like being in a stressful environment, pressing in on my brain and my consciousness. If it's too much, I have a breakdown and it crushes me. Whereas if the pressure inside, if I block out too much of the external world and don't let any new information in, I become delusional and I become too self-referential. And it's a type of, like if someone kind of gets lost in like conspiracy theories or delusion, like they're pushing too hard against new information coming in, they become too self-referential. So this was a visual way of showing that line moving back and forth of, this really intense noise and red light hitting me versus my ability to like shut out the outside world. And that a healthy system is always pressing against each other, those two forces. If one or the other wins, there's a system collapse on either side. And that's been really helpful. Yeah.
You've been working on these for a long time.
Yeah.
So for some people that are interested in investigating mindfulness and consciousness, what are the shortcuts that you would recommend
That's great.
for us to get the knowledge that we need in terms of neuroscience, in terms of the good gear we would need? That's the question.
So an easy one to start with is this headset, the Muse. I did ask Marlon to get some for ER. I don't know if you will or not. You can get them for like 100 or 125 on eBay, but hopefully we get some in the ER. This will connect to this app called Mind Monitor, and it just streams in the data and you can visualize it in different ways. So you'll recognize that from the video research I was doing of those lines going up and down that screen there. But you can get these other views. That's a good way just to start using an EEG that's easy to put on, it's easy to charge, it connects with the app quite easily. and you start seeing those levels go up. You know, before you're making creative decisions, before you like, how do I route this to music? How do I route this to a visual? How do I route this to water or whatever you want? You can just start to see what is my brain doing and what sort of response am I getting on the screen in terms of the spikes and the dips. From that app, you can route from this app, I believe in Ableton through, have you covered something called OSC? It's similar to MIDI. There's a million different ways that devices can talk to each other. You don't have to learn all of them. You just like grab whatever you need for that project. I think that was one of the overwhelming things of doing this type of work. I was like, how am I gonna learn every single framework? And it's like, I'm not. You know, I just find something that works for the thing I want to create in that moment and like connect the dots. And then I get a little more familiar with that particular thing. So this app can stream data into the computer and then you can run it into P5 or, and then from P5 you can send it over to our Arduino, which is what I'm doing to control the speaker here. This headset, without this app, there's also an Ableton plugin. So if you want to mess around with turning thought into sounds, there's an Ableton plugin called, now I can email these to Ellen afterwards, Muse EG. It's in my bookmarks, but a developer had created a VST, like a plugin that you could bring into Ableton. It connects with the headset for you and then streams the different brainwaves in, and you can assign those brainwaves to different parameters in Ableton, so you can control volumes, turn knobs on a synthesizer. And then the other thing you can do is connect this via JavaScript. So when I was doing the demo earlier, that's what this is. So if I reload this window here that's looking for the device and then connects to it is part of a framework called Muse.js. So it's a JavaScript framework. Once you get it in from there, you can send it over to P5 and do visualizations. There's also, there's some sound capability with P5. So you can do different, you can play MIDI notes, you can do some basic synthesis, or there's also Tone.js, which you can create your own synthesizers. And that's something I'm exploring as well. I know we have only a few minutes left.
Yeah, we have about 6 minutes before we start wrapping up. And
Any other questions? Otherwise, I can show you one DNA project that uses Tone.js and P5. Yeah.
How do you sustain your artwork? Like, what do you, like, how do you make money off that?
So one of the things is once you do this type of work and people are interested, and this sucks, is that you have to get to a point where you're doing cool stuff and it looks like you're making money before people pay you. And so that's one of the things, the advantages of school is you're in school and you've got this time to like create a cool portfolio and like post things and people get excited about your work. So this is a runway of a time where you can do that phenomenon. So by the time you finish, if you've got things that you're really excited by, other people will probably be excited by them too and be more likely to hire you. So a few things. One is consulting. So I did a lot of consulting last year for, it was like a sound bed company down in Austin. So it was like kind of the shape of a yoga mat, and it had transducers like this bass woofer in it. And you feel the music as well as hear it. It's a really cool device. And they just need someone who understood this. And not many people in the world do. So that's why this program is really special. You know, to become, one of the terms is a creative technologist. And it's where you understand code, you understand the machinery, you understand creativity. You know, if you have knowledge of engineering, and when I say engineering, I mean just P5 or, you know, anything that's technical, and you're creative, having both of those skills in the same person is super valuable. And so they hired me, it was like a full year of consulting, which helped pay for my low res program right now. So those types of opportunities come up. And then what I'm doing now is focusing on taking the EEG software that I've built and commercializing it. And so I'm working with Future Labs is upstairs in Tandon. They're an incubator. So I've talked with them and they're helping me figure out a business plan of like, what's the first place, what's the entry point in the market for this type of technology that addresses a very severe need. And that's a shift for me, because I'm like, I made something cool, like why won't you like give me money? And that's how it works in the art world, is if you do something cool, you get booked for shows and you can make money that way. With commercialization, it has to be like this really specific entry point into the market. And then once you get rid of all the other ideas and you're like, all right, figure out this one thing, you present it to them. And they're like, okay, that's cool. And then what? And I was like, well, I presented all these other ideas before, but what they want is the narrative. I'm gonna start here and then I'm gonna do this and then I'm gonna expand into this market. And so for me in this work, what's coming up is the idea of, I need to partner with hardware companies. So, partner with the company that makes this. You can check this out afterwards if you want to see it. These are EEG headphones, and so it plays the music and detects your brainwaves at the same time. So it's got these prods here and sensors by the ears. And so I'm doing a test build for them to see if they want my software paired with their hardware. And then once I create those partnerships, going into the place where it seems like the biggest need right now with sonification is neurotherapy. And neurotherapists want some sort of like beautiful musical feedback to what's going on in the brains of the clients in real time. And they are desperately trying to like hack together their own solutions by like, just controlling the volume on like MP3s they have, but opening multiple instances of this kind of older software and for each brainwave. It's like a very messy procedure, and they're sick of their own songs and they want someone else to be able to make the music. So there's a need there, and part of the depth of their need is that the clients they're working with are people who have tried every other type of therapy and it hasn't worked. So it's a lot of first responders with severe post-traumatic stress. And so the people who are the clients, they're willing to put on headsets, they're willing to do anything because they're kind of at the end of their road. And so the therapists who want to help these people are desperate to find a solution that is elegant, works really well, is easy to use. And so that seems like a good market entry point. And then within that community, they then have relationships with like the psychedelic journey community, where they do music to help people go through psychedelic therapy journeys. But there's no biosensors. The journey isn't changing based on what's happening in the person's brain. Just the client is watching the person and like turning knobs. And so that would be like a next potential market. So that narrative is something that I need a lot of help. And NYU has a ton of resources. So there's Future Labs upstairs, and then there's Leslie E Labs, which is near Washington Square. That's another entrepreneur type thing where there's people that can help you form, how do I make money from the cool things that I build at ITP?
Have you tried the EEG on the patients? Like with neuroresearchers, like that is therapy?
I haven't, but the neurotherapists have a lot. So they have a ton of data of what's going on in the brain. And that's where I get to learn more by pairing up with these neuroscientists and neurotherapists who have much more access to patients. But I haven't worked with patients with that severe. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's a great question. Anything else, Ellen?
Well, does anyone else have any questions? I know that we are about to go into final project development. So the final project's going to be assigned next week, and then it'll be about the last month of this class. We'll be devoted to working on final projects. Do you have any advice or recommendations for how you develop a project, or that you learned from your process?
Well, my previous process, and this is valid, is finding a technology you think is really cool, or you've seen another artist use a technology and you're like, all right, I'm gonna start by creating something similar to that. And just as an artist, you're always gonna have your own vision. So even if you're like trying to imitate something, you're gonna end up creating something that's uniquely you. There's a little book called Steal Like an Artist, which is great. Yeah, it sounds like it's okay to be inspired by other people's work and use it as a starting point. So that is a valid direction, is like finding a piece that you like, art that you like, or technology you're like, oh, that's cool. How could I get it to do something? And that was my work with this. Once I saw this EEG, I was like, oh, cool. I want to can I play a note on a synthesizer with my brain? And then what I'm learning in the low res program is the idea of, is there a topic that really interests me? And so one of the things that I'm looking at for my research this semester is, what is the impact of repetitive beats on the brain? Like, why is repetitive beats, particularly at a certain frequency, so common in music across a bunch of different cultures? And I'm hypothesizing that the range of the frequency range and the tempo of dance music essentially correlates with the possible tempo range of the human heart, because we all spend, you know, several months in the womb listening to like love dub of our mom's heartbeat, and then, you know, we grow up and all of a sudden we're on dance floors and we're like, I really like this frequency, I really like this beat, I really like this tempo. And just looking at what's the neuroscience behind that. I don't know what the art is yet. I'm just exploring that as a topic, and then the art will come out of that topic. So you can go either direction. Is that helpful?
Oh, yeah.
Great.
Say we really like the EEG technology. Are there any like cheaper alternatives that like us students could access?
They do have some EEGs here called the Motive, so they're already here. So just go to the ER, and it's so funny it's called ER. I was thinking like emergency room, but go to the equipment room, and they do have several Emotive. They're slightly different than this. I think it's like there's a band that comes around from the side, but there are EEGs here that you can access for free. And I haven't used Emotive, but I believe there would have to be some documentation on people who have used it. I know Lisa Park used it initially. I think she uses the Muse now, but she was an ITP student, right?
Yes, I will find some links and send them out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you all do have access to EEGs here.
Yeah.
Or you can build your own. You create an Arduino with, and it's just an electrode. You know, there's nothing special about it. It's just reading electricity. If I put this electrode on my wrist, it picks up my heart electricity, you know, as my pulse is going through. So there's nothing special about these electrodes that are specifically like brain electrodes. They're just electrodes. So I know Arduino or SparkFun or something has like an EEG or a heart rate sensor, and that's just a simple electrode that goes into an Arduino and gives you values you can chart. So instead of putting it on your heart, just put it on your head. So you can build your own. Yeah, so you can start with one, and that's how it starts. Just start with one sensor, one Arduino board, and see what values you get. How do they go up and down? And then iterate from there.
Any other questions for Jason? I really appreciate that you hit on a number of topics that have come up repeatedly in this class, which is how to develop a project one step at a time so that you can move at a successful pace.
Yeah.
Also, the importance of documentation and how that is just a critical aspect of your practice.
Mm-hmm.
Like even today, you set up a camera.
Mm-hmm.
So that's just a normal part of what you do. And also user testing, which is something that we're gonna get a chance to implement for your final projects. They've been doing rapidly prototyping all these different ideas. Every week they make something new, but we haven't had a chance to really spend a long time, more than a week, developing something. So we'll talk more about user testing as we head into that week. And there's different models for facilitating that and thinking about that. And how to not get defensive when you're user testing.
Yep.
You get a lot of really useful information.
One thing that can help with user testing is try to disprove your idea. Make that your intention. And so when you get information that doesn't support your idea, you're welcoming it. You're like, actually, I want to disprove it. And if you can't disprove it, you're like, oh, this is a really good project.
That's a great
So
tip.
that can flip the attitude.
That's a really great tip. Thank you. Yeah, anything else? I want to thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for your time and attention. I know these classes are
I just want to I'm going to quickly pull up the website just so you can see what's ahead for our next class. And I just need the table, and I don't want to
the HDMI.
touch anything in